If you haven't been here for a while, or this is your very first time, through this Lent series, Pastor Cheryl's been preaching on looking for love in all the wrong places. And I'm going to continue that today, and mine is going to be looking for love in all the wrong places and the chains that bind us. But up to this point, we've explored living water, the true water that sustains and nourishes and quenches our thirst. And we've talked about where our real security lies. And sometimes there can be a little bit of a fine line between security and those things, those chains that bind us to the world. One of the best examples that I could think of was the show Hoarders on the Discovery Channel. How many of you have ever watched that show? Well, there's a few of you out there willing to admit to that guilty pleasure, just like me. But for those of you who have not watched Hoarders, it's a very wonderful show. It's about people who suffer from extreme obsessive-compulsive disorder. And they hoard stuff in their houses. Sometimes they're people whose collections, if you will, have gotten out of hand. And they have to collect every single thing that even remotely ties into what the original collection was. Sometimes it's just a desire to see how much stuff they can have, and it becomes an unquenchable, almost love security kind of thing. But when you see the houses, and the camera people are really good at showing these houses, because what happens is it starts out with just a little bit, and then pretty soon the bedroom's full. And then pretty soon the other bedroom's full. And then the other bedroom, and then the living room, and then the den, maybe the kitchen, maybe the bathroom, and pretty soon the house is overflowing floor to ceiling with stuff. Now, what happens with people, if they've got a family that's also living in these conditions, it becomes very difficult to move, to function. Sometimes they can't even eat proper meals because the kitchen is so full they can't get to the kitchen. And they can't get to the bathroom. And they can't cook. And sometimes family members give up even living in that environment. And what ultimately happens is that these people, the hoarders themselves, become chained, if you will, bound to this stuff that they've accumulated. Now, what the show Hoarders does is usually the family members, sometimes the hoarders themselves, will go, wait a minute, something's got to change. We can't live like this. I'd like to have my family back in my life. Sometimes the family members are going, wait a minute. We would like to have our mother or our grandmother or our sister or our father back in our lives. Or we'd like to have mom or dad, or we'd like to be able to live back in our house. And so they call in these psychologists who specialize in this type of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And they have an intervention. And usually, everybody sits around and talks about what's important to them and how much they've been hurt by this behavior, and then eventually they come to a plan about dealing with this. But what is so striking, as you listen to the voices of the hoarders themselves, you realize how attached they've become to this stuff. This is their love. This is their security. This is their connection with life. And the thought of throwing that stuff away, or moving it, or getting rid of it, or putting it in some other kind of storage becomes almost overwhelming. and sometimes they can't even accomplish it. Now sadly, when they can't accomplish it, and sometimes it's been bad enough where they've had to tear down houses. And they've had to, put people in places where they can get proper treatment. Now I know that this show about hoarders is about an extreme. But it's a pretty good example of what happens to ordinary, everyday people like you and I when things get out of hand. When we put things ahead of our relationships with our families, with our friends, with God. I mean, we all know those people. People like us. They're business people. Maybe they're a person in an office that you worked in. Or maybe it's someone you know now. And they go to work. And pretty soon, they're no longer just working 8 hours a week or working 10 hours to finish that special project, but now they're working 10 hours and 15 hours and 20 hours and 25 hours and 30 hours and 40 hours and 60 hours. And it's no longer just about doing their work or finishing their project. Their life becomes tied up in that connection to their job. That's how they find their security. And you know, when you hear them say, well, geez, if I work another 20 hours this week, that's another $400 or $500 that I can put in the bank. And, I can build a little security. And, geez, it gives me such a wonderful feeling to know that I'm in control of this. Or maybe it's the parent. I mean, we know parents like this who start out really wanting to be excellent, wonderful parents. And they're no longer, they just somehow get so caught up in their children's lives that they're no longer helping their children make decisions or guide their children in making decisions. But now they're controlling every single aspect of their child's life, and they're hovering right over them, and they're making sure that they do their schoolwork, and they're making sure that they get up in the morning, and they're making sure that they're playing the sports that they want them to play. Now sometimes the children don't want to do it, but that's how the parents become obsessed, and pretty soon they can't separate their own lives from that of their children. Or maybe it's an elected official or one of those politicians who get so engrossed in the power and privilege of their job that they forget what constituents they represent. They forget that they represent all of the constituents in their district. They're so caught up in a party platform, or being right, or having power. And these elected officials, they're the ones that you read about occasionally making unethical decisions, maybe taking a bribe, or embezzling some money, because they've forgotten what this is about. Now, none of this is wrong. I mean, there's really nothing wrong about being a good parent or being a hard-working, dedicated employee or being a politician. The problem is what we do with those. Because there's absolutely good things that we can do. But it's when we lose track as people of what it's about. And that's a result of our culture. As long as we live in the kind of culture that we have, it's easy to get caught up in those things of the world that take us away from our families, take us away from God. Robin Myers, in his book, Saving Jesus from the Church, says it this way: in a capitalist society where money measures the value of almost everything, no one ever thinks enough is enough. In a society that elevates competition to the level of a sacred spectacle, we're always reminded that we fall short of someone else's prowess and expertise. In a celebrity culture, most of us are peons. In an entertainment culture, most of us are spectators. But most of all, in a consumer culture, we are all 3 easy payments away from hard rock abs, easy salad preparation, or a lucrative career in real estate. Now, I know that these are things of the world, and we're talking about things here in church, and we're talking about things of faith. But it's these real things, these things that we live with every single day, that not only take us away from our earthly families, from our heart-healthy ways of living, but they're also the things that take us away from God. We become chained, just like the hoarders do, to the things of the world. Now, you say, okay, how do I know if I've got a problem? Well, if you're sitting here in this room, even thinking about that and asking that question, it might really be time to think about what you're doing. It might really be time to think about how you live your life. To look at why you're working those 60 and 70 hours a week. Why are you doing it? And if you hear the words money, power, as you think about that, it might be time to do something. Maybe you hear it in the words of your family. Geez, dear, you worked, the last 3 weeks, 125 hours a week, and we promised to take the kids to the theater tonight to watch a movie. If you find yourself saying, well, yeah, but I've got this really important job to do, you really need to think about why you're doing it. And maybe you're missing meetings. Or maybe you're not doing things that you like to do, or you're forgetting to do those household tasks or those chores, or being involved in the groups that you've always belonged to, maybe at church. It might be time to think about what you're doing. Listen to what people tell you. Listen to those words of family and friends. Listen to the Spirit touching your heart. Listen to those emotions and those feelings, because they're not going to guide you wrong. You'll know. But okay, so you realize now that you've got a problem. How do I fix it? That's the tough part. That's the really, really guts in the street, the boots on the street part. Because that's the hard part. Identifying the problem is the first step. But how do you start changing behavior? One of the things that one of my very dear psychologist friends tells me is you've got to start changing behavior. If you really want to do it, and it starts very simply, you just have to do one thing to change the behavior. And I think that what the psalmist in our Psalm 130 today did was very appropriate. Because the psalmist knew that he couldn't do it on his own. He knew that he was at the bottom of the pit. Now, in this particular scripture, or this particular psalm, is from Everyday Psalms, and the writer is talking about depression. Being in the bottom of that pit of depression. But what does he say? I'm in the bottom of the pit. I can't climb out without you. I can't do this on my own. And he recognized that fact. And the very first thing he did was to put his focus on God. Put his focus on God. Because what God wants is the best for us. God doesn't want us down in the pit. God doesn't want us chained to the world. God wants us free to live and love and have connections with family and friends. And the second thing that's really, really important is to start realizing where maybe you got derailed, where the train got derailed, if you will. And Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, gives us some pretty good understandings of how we might have gotten derailed. If we're focusing on things of the world, if we're focusing on lust, if we're focusing on envy, if we're focusing on power, we're focusing on control, we're focusing on licentiousness, we're not focusing on God. And they're not compatible. And what Paul says is they're not compatible. You need to focus on the things, the spiritual things, if you want to live a spiritual life. And then I think the last part of this trying to recover from this is just having faith. The kind of faith that Mary had in John's Gospel when she said, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now that's the kind of faith that it takes to overcome these problems. That's the kind of faith that it takes to free yourself from these chains. Faith. That when you know that Jesus is going to do what Jesus says Jesus is going to do. And if you do those things, and you hang on to those things, and you put your trust in the things that are of faith and of spirit, it doesn't conquer it, but it gives you tools. And it gives you the ability to reconnect with those things that are the real sources of our love. Connections with family. Connections with friends. Peace and justice and feelings of wholeness. And if you believe in those things, and you really listen to those things, and you follow those things, you're going to be unbound from the chains. You're going to find the true spiritual living water that quenches your thirst. You're going to find where true security lies. And like Lazarus, the tomb door is going to be opened. And you'll hear that voice, come out. Come out. Let go. And untie him from those bindings and let him go. And that makes you free to live and to love and to serve. So as you leave this place today, may this be the day. May this be the day that you're set free, that you're unchained and unbound with love in all the right places. Amen.